We'll go over this chapter 12 homework. I might even do some things kind of out of order because, for example, I want to really spend more time on number 3. It's very similar to the type of your quiz you're going to have. But this number 1, you already had that video on it. So let's go over number 2 down here and see how you come up with that one. Okay. So number 2, that was the one where the EPA, and so this is really a situation that happens. The Environmental Protection Agency wanted to check a former waste dump to see if the soil was toxic there. So the population is like, what is the total amount of stuff? Like what is the final product you wanted to make a conclusion about? What was your end conclusion about? And it was about all the soil at that former industrial waste dump, okay? But then parameter of interest. Remember we just said population parameter. Population parameter. Parameter is the information about the population. And that's typically in the format of a proportion or a mean. We're going to do that in a mathematical amount. And so I look at what I have here. This is very interesting. I think you could have said one of these two. You could have said, hey, I think they're going to collect data this way. And they're going to say, they're going to take a proportion of the 16 samples that had toxicity in them, and then maybe they're going to report that to the people, okay? Or maybe they're going to go take their samples and they're going to get a quantity. So maybe they're going to like have a numerical amount of how much toxicity was in those soil samples. And in that case, you would say to the people, hey, guess what? The average toxicity level at that waste dump is this. Whatever that's measured in. See? So I think you could do it either one of those ways. You could give information to the people about either one of those ways. Okay. Now, sampling frame. See, I had never ever said anything to you about that until it was on the video yesterday for the homework. So that's why it was so necessary to watch that video. So sampling frame is bigger than the actual sample. Sampling frame is like, I want to make a conclusion about all of the soil there, but I might not be able to actually get to all the soil. Maybe some of it's underneath a big pile of cars. Maybe it's under some buildings. So I can't actually sample all of the soil. So where my samples come from is the soil that I can actually access. So the accessible soil at that waste dump. That's my frame. Okay, and then of course, the sample itself is those 16 samples. Now, on the top of the next page, this was interesting. It says, what sampling method did they use? They said nothing about how they collected those samples. So I don't know if that threw you off, but I tried to say that in that video about the problem number 1. Sometimes they don't give you enough information. And so that's why we can't tell on F. But hey, I want to talk to you real quick about a way. How would you do this? How would be a way that you would go about taking that land and trying to get a good representative sample of that land? What kind of things do you want to consider to get a good representative sample of all that land? What do you think, Tyler?
You want to consider the spots that you're choosing the soil from.
Okay, good. You don't want them all in one place, right? You want to consider the places you're getting the soil from. You don't want it all in one spot. What if it's all around the business offices instead of over there in the corner where they kept the barrels with the toxic fluids in it? Okay, good. So what's one way that we could maybe make sure we are spreading our samples across the site? How could we do that, Hadley? Okay, we could do systematic. What do you want to do with the land itself? Maybe. I would do something, you could, I would probably figure out how to get quadrants, or even if you did string across it or whatever, to section it off into equal size little plots or something. So then maybe you could number them and do this, you could pick a random one to start with, and then if Hadley says do a systematic, then you would pick every 10th spot after that or whatever. Okay, that's good. Then that's random places throughout the waste dump. Good job. Now, let me ask you this. What happens if you had something like in this waste dump, you had this, and this is where they had barrels of toxic fluid. This is where they had the cars that were just sitting there, and then here were the business offices, and then, I don't know, this was just the entrance to the place. If you had something like this situation, you might want to make sure you get some from each of those little quadrants, right? How could you do that? What would that be called? Good, stratify. And you would want to stratify that so you make sure you get some from this section and some from this section and some from this section and some from this section, maybe 4 from each section. Good. Okay, so that's the way you could handle that, so you make sure you get a representative sample of the entire waste dump. Good. Let's go ahead and move on. Number 3. This one is going to be similar format to your quiz, okay? Because the quiz will give you a situation and then ask you to identify the strategy and then the bias. And so I want to give you a word of warning. If your answers do not match mine, don't panic. Because on many of these, I can see multiple possibilities, but the key is you better justify your answer. You see how I elaborate and I go into, in particular, why I chose that bias. You better do that, or else if your answer isn't like mine, then it's wrong. Okay? All right. But if you pick an answer different from mine and you elaborated and explained, and I'm like, yeah, I can see that, then you can get credit. Okay, so let's take a look. So this was the situation where we had 20 elementary schools and in a big city. So spread out, lots of different things going on. And so they want to get the opinion of all the elementary students, parents, and they ask them, do you think that your child should have to pass a test, the state test or whatever, to go into the next school grade? And so they did a couple choices of how to sample. The first one says, put an ad in a big newspaper, or put a big ad in the newspaper asking people to log their opinions on the PTA website. So I obviously have the answer here, and it says voluntary response sampling. Why did I call that voluntary response sampling? What made me decide that?
Because you could do it if you wanted to.
Okay, you could do it if you wanted to. You were asking the people to take action. You were asking the people to take action and to volunteer their answer. So that they had to actively become a member of the sample. And so who's going to do that? The people that have a what? Strong opinion about that topic. And so naturally with voluntary response sampling always is that voluntary response bias. Now, I could see another situation, another type of bias associated with this problem. So who else came with another type of bias? Yes, Callie, what you come? So see, if it limits to people with internet, I think that would be more called under coverage, because you're not getting all people. Non-response would mean that the PTA people went to go try to ask everybody, and nobody had elementary students, or nobody who saw the ad had elementary school students. Okay, so that would be non-response. Okay, so I would say under coverage. I kind of say under coverage also because of this thing right here. Do your parents get the newspaper? I don't. If yours do, fine. All day long, it seems like about 50% or less of my students' parents get the newspaper. I don't have time to read it. I look at the front page, I go, okay, and then it goes in the recycling bin. So it didn't take too many of those times for me to figure out I don't need this subscription to the newspaper and be paying for it. Okay, so what kind of bias would that be if I hone in on the fact that it's being put in a newspaper ad? What kind of bias is that? It is under coverage. Under coverage, only those people who read the newspaper. And is that all kinds of people? Maybe, no. That's not all. Maybe that's limiting people who have time to do it, or I don't know. All right, next. Randomly select one of the elementary schools and contact every single parent. highlighting that every parent. So what do you think about that? Obviously, you can see what I thought. Hey, cluster, you're a group. I will sample all of you. So this is what indicated to me that they were treating this like a clustering sample. They just randomly selected one of the elementary schools, and that was a cluster. Now, I personally have a problem with that, because what is the quality supposed to be of a cluster? Yes, a cluster is supposed to be a miniature representation of the population. Do you think every one of those 20 elementary schools in a big city is like the others? No. So I think that's why this is a poor method. Furthermore, I think actually I like this explanation of why I think it's a bad method better than what I had written up there first. See, look. Because I think since one elementary school is just having one elementary school is an unrepresentative cluster, that it's leaving out certain types of students. That's under coverage. Okay? Now, I put non-response, and I don't actually like that one as much as I like the under coverage. I think the reason I did non-response is because anytime you're trying to get all of something, remember how in our notes, census is kind of naturally goes with non-response because it's difficult to get all of them. And just is 50% of a census enough? I mean, is that a census? No, not, So I think that's why I initially said non-response, okay? I could see one more possibility here if you honed in on something else. Any other thing did you think of? Anything? How are they contacting the parents? By phone. If they are contacting the parents by phone, then they're essentially interviewing them. And if they're interviewing them and they have not been properly trained on the interviewing techniques, then they could be influencing their response. How might that happen? I'm calling you and I'm saying, hey, do you think that children should go on to the next grade if they haven't passed that test that says they've learned everything they're supposed to? See, what have I just kind of, even in my voice, if you couldn't see me, what have I kind of led you to respond? Yeah, they're going to want to say that they shouldn't go on to the next grade if they are not prepared. Just because of the way I kind of vocally led them that way, I'm kind of indicating which way I want them to do it. So that's maybe lack of privacy, because they don't want to say something to me in the way that I answer. They want to answer the way I want them to respond. So again, that could be response bias due to lack of privacy. Okay, see? Do you see what I'm saying? There's multiple things that can happen, and if what you say is justified correctly, you can say the wrong ones, and then I'm saying, okay, no, that's not it. But you can say different right ones. Next, send a survey home with every single elementary student in the district. That sounds like a huge undertaking to me. And ask parents to fill it out and return it the next day. I mean, that is just non-realistic. But anyway, first of all, since they're asking every single one of them to do it, then they're attempting a census. And we know that's pretty unrealistic. But I still think you could say some other things. What else did you say? Anybody hone in on this? They're asking the parents to fill it out and return it. What's that? That's voluntary response.
But only the kids who are responsible will bring it.
Gotcha. I can see that too. So then here's this. So I can see that. So you could say voluntary response and voluntary response bias because the kids are returning it. But then here's what Grace said. She said under coverage because only the responsible kids are going to actually get it home and out of their backpack and get it returned. I could have taken that answer. Yeah. Okay, moving on. Next, randomly select 20 parents from each elementary school. So you have all 20 elementary schools, and then you take some from you and some from you and some from all of you. What is the quality of these 20 elementary schools? What kind of grouping is that? That's a strata. Why would you call these strata? What's a similar trait? How do elementary schools get grouped? Like location. Yeah. So if you live on the so the similarities of those students come from the same kind of neighborhoods. They're all living in the same kind of neighborhoods. So that could be culture, socioeconomic. I'm telling you, the elementary schools on the west side of Fort Worth is very different from the elementary schools' culture and socioeconomics of the ones on the north side of Fort Worth. Okay? So they have different cultures and different plans and all that kind of stuff for their students. So take some from all of the elementary schools. That's called stratifying. I actually liked that method. I thought it was really pretty good. Hey, why do you think they went to so much trouble to write this in? Send them a survey and follow up with a phone call if they have not returned it within a week. Why did they put that in there? Yeah, to say that they're safeguarding against undercoverage, non-response bias, that kind of stuff. So they're trying to say, hey, we're trying to make this valid by making sure we follow up and get the responses. Okay, very good. Done with that. Questions there? Does it make you nervous? There can be so many answers. I don't know. Yeah, if what you explained it is valid according to that thing. Like, for example, saying it's non-response bias, but you described it like under coverage, that's wrong. Okay? But if you say the right thing and describe it correctly, and I say that's valid for that problem, I can see that, then you can get credit. Okay, number 4. Man, I struggle with this one. I struggle so much that I even can see something different from what I said this morning. Okay? So let's talk about that. Here we go. So this is interesting. The Fish and Wildlife people are trying to study the kinds of fish that are taken out of Saginaw Bay. So that's the population that they're trying to get represented. All right, so to do that, here's what they did. Randomly selected 5 fishing boats at the end of one randomly chosen day. Okay, and then they count the number of types of all the fish on those boats. So, what I've come to the conclusion of is that if you had this problem and it was on a quiz or a test or something, I probably would have had to been pretty lenient on the way that you said these samples were taken, because I even disagree with the book. But one thing that I would look for, the way you would have gotten credit for this, is to say that is definitely a multi-stage method. Because they are doing 2 randomization procedures in there. Do you see that? 2 randomization procedures. They are randomly selecting the boats, and they randomly selected the day. There was 2 randomization procedures. It was multi-staged. That's how you would have gotten credit. Because here's how the book said it. They said they clustered the day. And so they picked one cluster. I don't like that because, hey, cluster, you're a group. I will sample all of you. What should they have done on that day? Not taken 5 boats, but taken all of them, okay? So I guess then that's why they said it was a simple random sample within that cluster. But, I'll tell you the thing, AP, they really stick with that thing where a cluster, once you get the cluster, you sample all of it, okay? So that is pretty consistent on the AP exam. I thought this. I said, hey, I think they simple random sampled the day. Okay, they put 365 numbers in the bag, shook well, pulled out 1, and that was the day. But then you know what else I put? This is in the past. I said they clustered the boat. And you know why I said they clustered the boat? Because they sampled all the fish on the boat. Now, what's a problem with that? Does anybody see a potential problem with calling those clusters? What do you think is the quality of the fish on those boats?
It could be stratified.
Do you think that those boats coming in from the bay, this is like coming off of the ocean, I guess, are many populations, or do you think they're homogeneous? I think they're probably more homogeneous. Don't you think there's some shrimping boats and some lobster boats and some tuna boats and some flounder boats? I mean, they go out to different sections that they know how to fish and know where those things are. So that's why I struggle with even that answer, because I'm wondering to myself, are the boats not homogeneous? And so therefore they're really strata. So they should pick some from that one and some from that one and some from all of the boats that come from that day. All right. So therefore, I can tell you if I was grading this problem, I would have only counted that you identified it was a multi-stage situation, because from there on out it gets kind of wanky. All right, but I can tell you right now, there's definitely bias going on. How could bias be happening, and what kind of bias is it? So what do you think about that day? What if they selected November 2nd? You like that day to be a good representation of what comes out of that bay?
Is that under coverage?
Yeah. Isn't that way different probably than what comes out April 2nd? So, yeah, I would think that that's not representative, and so therefore it's under coverage. What happens if those boats were strata and they only chose 5 of the boats, and that's not all the strata? Then aren't they not getting all the kinds of fish? What's that called if you're not getting all the kinds of fish? Again, under coverage. So I think any way they did it, it was under coverage. Okay. Man, I'm really loving this next one. Let me tell you. What time do we have? Where are we going? Okay, we got time. Okay, good. Because there's problems like these next two are on the unit test. Hint, hint. Okay? So I'm going to kind of go over some stuff on this. Okay, let's read this one. I like it. Hey, they go to an amusement park and they say, man, this is a great new roller coaster. It is so popular that people are waiting up to 3 hours for that 2-minute ride. So they're concerned at how patrons, in other words, all the patrons in the park, who paid large amounts to get into the park and ride on the rides, they want to see how they feel about that. So they survey every 10th person. I'm liking that, every 10th one. What kind of sampling is that? Bam! I love that one because I'm like, every 10th, boom, systematic, done, move on. I don't have to worry about it. That's it. Okay, so you see why I like that one? But anyway, they did every 10th person that's in the line for that roller coaster. They're doing that. So here's my question. Who are they trying to make a generalization about? Good. The population that they are wanting to make a generalization about is all the patrons in the park. But who do they ask? Just the people in the line that are getting ready to ride that ride. So let me ask you this. Is that a good representation of all the patrons in the park in regards to their opinion about waiting in line? No. So here's the kind of question I ask on the test. And so I would say something like this. Does this overestimate or underestimate estimate the proportion of patrons that will wait in long rides and in long lines? So is this sampling method overestimating or underestimating the proportion of patients that will wait? Good. It is overestimating because they're asking people who are proving that they're ready to wait in line. And so all the people that don't want to wait in line, guess where they are? Somewhere else. Okay? Very good. So that's important. By the way, the sampling frame is all the people that are in that line, and the sample itself is made up of every 10th person. The sample itself is every 10th person. I like this number 6. It's similar. The managers of the park decide to survey city residences. So the population is all the city's parents. Okay, so they're hoping to give information to the newspaper or whoever, or the city council who wants to fund this. They want to say all the city's parents think this. about the quality of the playground. But who do they ask? They go hand out questionnaires to the parents who bring their children to the park. Tell me about that. What's wrong with just asking the parents who bring their children to the park? Under coverage, because those people, what is their opinion? They like the park. They're bringing their kids to the park. The people that don't like the park, what? Aren't there. So here's the question. Does this overestimate or underestimate the people who like the park? Overestimates the people who like the park. So then they're going to take that to the city council and they're going to say, hey, guess what, city council? Woohoo, we don't need money because people in the city like the park and they don't think it needs to be changed. Okay, so you see what I'm saying? You have to identify who are they going to generalize to so you can then say, well, this sample is not representative. So identifying that. We'll skip 7, but there's the things there if you want it. 8, real quickly. This is the wording changing your conclusions? And look here. Do you think high school students should be required to wear uniforms? I think it's probably okay. Sometimes I worry about this word required because sometimes people are like, oh, you're going to require me to do something? I don't think so. So, just by nature of somebody forcing something on you, they're going to say, no, nobody can tell me what to do. So it's probably okay, though. But look here at this second statement. Given humanity's great tradition of exploration, do you favor continued funding for that space program? Just me saying that makes you want to say what? Yes. Heck yes. We need to continue to fund it. Yes, you're so excited and we want to continue that great tradition. So this is then going to overestimate the people who want to continue the funding. It's going to overestimate the people that want to continue the funding. Because if all I did was come up to you and said, hey, do you want to continue the funding for the space program? You might have other priorities like, no, I think first responders need more money, or I think teachers need more money. Good stamp for you. I think teachers need more money, or something like that. And so, no, I don't think the space, they've had enough money for a while, so let's give it to somebody else. Okay, see, so it's going to overestimate those in favor. Last thing, notice here on part A, you can just do a simple random sample, but what happens if I need to make sure I get some of the wholesale type and some of the retail type? I want to make sure I don't just have a sample of 10 of one kind. I want to make sure I get both types. What should I do? Yep. If I want to make sure I get both types, I need to stratify, make a bag of the wholesale ones and a bag of the retail ones and pull some from each of those bags so I guarantee my sample has both kinds. That's stratifying. Okie dokie. So again, your homework is that page 16, which is the chapter 12 warm-up, and you have all your resources online if you need that.